as a researcher and a journalist looking at the science of performance. And so I basically go places where people are really, really good at what they do and see what makes them tick. It looks like magic from a distance, but it's not magic. We all know that feeling of walking into a group, whether that's a business or a school or a team or a community, and there's just energy, right? There's some chemistry, there's some feel, there's some cooperation and trust and selflessness. And it feels like magic, but again, it's not magic, it's a thing. So I've spent the last 7 years looking deeply into what that's made of and visiting the top performing cultures on the planet. Pixar, Navy SEALs Team 6, San Antonio Spurs, even a Serbian gang of jewel thieves, which was kind of crazy, and seeing what makes them tick. And this conversation becomes super important right now because we're all trying to figure that out on the fly. This conversation itself didn't happen 2 or 3 years ago. And we find ourselves moving into this hybrid age. Work and culture is changing. And so the question that's in front of all of us right now is, how do we adapt? How do we stay connected and learn together? So this question of building culture has never been more urgent. I've been about 7 years going around to these different places and seeing what they're about. And I'm consistently surprised by a couple things. One is that they're not like happy in the way you would expect. Like we have this idea of what it's like to work at Pixar, or this idea of what it's like to be on a top flight, special operations team, or the San Antonio Spurs. And we sort of think in our heads like, oh, those places operate on a higher plane. Like when you get to those places, every idea is smart and there's never any, bad ideas. There's never any ugly disagreements or anything. And in fact, that's wrong. Like at top performing cultures, there's actually slightly more tension because they're turning toward it together. In bad cultures, a problem comes up and people kind of turn away from it a little bit, right? In good cultures, they get super interested and turn toward it, and they will have vibrant arguments about which idea is best because those arguments are taking place in the bounds of safe connection. So it's a different kind of fun. I think of it as like type 2 fun. Type 1 fun is like, it's really happy and upbeat. Type 2 fun is harder. It's like climbing a mountain. You get this reward for effort. And I heard somebody call it, the vibe of being in great cultures is solving hard problems with people you admire. You're gathered shoulder to shoulder around the problem with people you admire. The other surprise that I guess hit me and over again is how alive culture is. Even in the very best cultures, they can fall apart. And even the very worst cultures can turn around. We sort of have this idea in our head that culture is fixed. Like, oh, Disney's just always going to be Disney, right? Or the US Marines are always going to be the US Marines. Not true. These things change. They go up and down all the time. And it really reinforces this deeper point that culture is not about words. It's about behaviors. It's like a language of behaviors that people are continually speaking. And any high-performing culture needs to be sending these behaviors over and over again in the same way that like our bodies need to have these circulatory systems, nervous systems, visual systems. And just like the functions of our body or the strength and health of our body, the strength and health of our culture depends on what we do every single day. No matter how great your culture is, no matter how bad your culture is, it depends on the actions that you're taking right now. That is a term that is sort of a synonym for I feel comfortable with them, right? This woman over here, she's just a good culture fit. What does that really mean? If we interrogate that, that means she reminds me of me. She talks like me, she walks like me, she wears the same clothes, like that kind of stuff. That's what we're really talking about. You end up with the most cognitively dangerous group, which is the monoculture, which can only think about things in a certain way. And in this age we're living in, where perspective is like gold, being able to look at things a new way is incredibly important. And the way to create culture fit, I'd like to sort of rethink that process, because smart cultures actually do create culture fit. They do it with diverse people, though. The real question is, how do you create that connection with a diverse team so that they can tackle problems as a cohesive unit? And some of the tools that I've seen smart cultures do on this, use on this, have to do with processes like building a team charter together. That's where you'd have the team together at the beginning of a project and you ask some really basic questions. What end state are we going for here? How are we going to work together? I've seen teams share users' manuals, which is sort of a guide to the best of me. Like, this is what you need to know about me to work with me. And everyone shares those and creates shared awareness. A team charter is a similar sort of process where we're going to get together. We're going to sort of talk about what tempo are we going to work at? Are we going to focus? How are we going to interact? How are we going to make decisions? How are we going to know that we're making progress? Who are we going to go to for feedback? We're going to kind of get our rules of engagement figured out so that we can fit together well, not in just a cosmetic way, but in a team way. A big shift in our world, I think, is that we used to talk and think and focus on leadership. Like, who's the best leader? How can I be a leader? As we move into this world that is demanding more adaptability, more learning, more malleability, I think the real question to ask is not, how can I be a great leader, but how can I be a great teammate? I'm going to offer a visual. The visual is like a flock of birds flying through a forest at high speed, going around trees, staying together, moving towards some goal. Is there one bird that can say, move 10 degrees to the left here, and now everybody turn to the right? No, you got to self-organize in real time around these problems and obstacles, and you got to stay oriented and aligned toward where you're going. So the question there is not, how can I be the lead bird? How can I know everything? It's like, how can I create connection and trust and awareness of where we're going and cohesion so that our group can, in real time, stay together and change. Those are two hard things to do, to like stay together and still change and then change again. That's the real challenge of modern work. And that's why focusing on contribution, being a teammate, matters way more than if you just are a fit. Trust is a really mysterious thing. And I think one way to sort of approach it is to think about the people in your own life that you trust the most. And the question I have is, are those people you are never vulnerable with, or are those the people you are most vulnerable with? In work situations, it's a place where we don't like to take risks. So reputations matter, status matters, track record matters, results matter. And so there's this real aversion to showing weakness, to displaying that you don't know something, that you're ignorant, or that you're having a bad day even. Like, there's this armor that we all wear all the time to stop that from happening. And the huge ironic thing that I discover over and over again when I go inside a high-performing culture is that they find ways to take that armor off together. And it's called a vulnerability loop. And it's when two people or more get together and profess weakness, show what's really going on, confess their ignorance, and talk about what's actually happening, not what they wish was happening, not what they hope was happening, but what's actually happening. Is probably the best example of it that I have is the Navy SEALs. After every mission or after every training run, the first thing they do before they even sleep or eat is they circle up and they start having a really hard meeting. The meeting is called an AAR, after action review. And it's based on 3 questions. What went well? What didn't go well? And what are we going to do differently next time? And it is a really difficult meeting to have because you have to own your mistakes and you have to point out the mistakes of your teammate over and over and over and over again, building a shared model of what you're doing together. Now, when we finish a really hard mission as a group, everybody knows that what you really want to do is to walk away and get on to the next thing. Declare it a success, just say, good job, tick it off our list. We finished, we're done, right? We rarely have the willpower to pause and to actually accurately look at what happened. Did we do what we set out to do? Did we make mistakes? Name those mistakes, name those barriers. Let's really x-ray it. And the SEALs have that willingness to do that. There's a moment there, that moment of a vulnerable pause that allows you to really see what's going on. And vulnerability is we tend to think of it sometimes that it's about emotion. It's really more about learning. It's really more about giving people visibility into what we're working on together. For the book, I visited Pixar, and somebody at Google told me a story that had happened 15 years ago with Ed Catmull. They said, we were all working at Pixar, and we were all working on a project, and Ed Catmull walked up and he sort of watched us with his arms folded. And we started getting nervous, like the boss, the genius, is watching us. I wonder what he's going to do. And he watched quietly for a while. And then he walked up and he said, hey, when you guys are done, could you come up to my office and teach me how to do that? What a moment, right? Here is a person who's got no reason to be vulnerable. No reason. He's the most confident, wealthiest, powerful person in the creative arts. And yet, what is he doing? He's walking up and he's showing a clear sign that he wants to learn. And that is really, I think, the key, this vulnerability based around learning, around saying, I don't know. There's a Navy SEAL commander named Dave Cooper who told me the 4 most important words any leader can say are, I screwed that up. Which is really, really powerful because it gives people permission to tell the truth. It gives people permission to create shared visibility over what's actually happening, not what they hope is happening, but what really happened. And that makes everyone smarter. So vulnerability is really about getting smarter, and it's really about getting more situationally aware. If to go back to that model of the birds flying through the forest, vulnerability is what enables you to have the awareness to know where you are in relation to everybody and to know where the obstacle is. Vulnerability is information. It's how a group brain gets really smart. It ends up being this sort of counterintuitive, painful exchange that isn't that different from like when we exercise in our body. Like, you know that when you exercise, you will feel pain. And because of that, your muscles will get stronger. That's how our bodies are built. It's a compensatory mechanism. You stress it and it gets stronger. Well, you know what? Human groups are exactly the same. Like, you stress them with vulnerability and they get stronger, they get tighter, they get, more cohesive and healthier. These ideas around vulnerability, I think, are a really, really powerful sort of vehicle to create that trust and connection that powers great groups. Traditional mentorship is a big ask, right? It's like asking somebody to be your aunt or your uncle. It's a very high stakes thing. Flash mentorship is a way of lowering the stakes to saying, hey, tell me, why did you write the memo that way? Or tell me, why did you start your presentation with that slide? And shorter, quicker conversations that get at the skill. The goal being, you're not trying to get everything from the mentor or trying to create a quasi-familial relationship. There's a related concept around Flash mentoring called dual purpose learning. And that is where you are continually operating to both kind of get things done and develop people. And it feels a little slower, but you do it by setting out some learning goals at the beginning of a project. And in dual purpose learning, you constantly are having short back channel Flash mentor-like conversations with the people who are ready to learn. There'll be a negotiation happen on the phone and they sit in the room and then they have 5 minutes of asking questions. Why did you negotiate like that? Right? So you're continually creating this apprenticeship-like relationship. And again, full warning, it feels very inefficient as you're doing it there. It doesn't feel fast because you're obviously pressing pause and slowing down and stopping and reflecting. But you know what? Pressing pause and reflecting is the only way development ever happens. The medical community, they've got that tradition of see one, do one, teach one. Where if there's a procedure, like, you're intubating someone, see one, do one, teach one. That's dual purpose learning. You're bringing somebody along the whole time. So it's an extraordinary opportunity of continuing to develop people. And that developmental piece really can't be overstated, because in this world, development is one of the few things that will keep people attached to a group. Right? We live in an age of hypermobility, hyperflexibility. People can and will work from anywhere. And what keeps them someplace? It's not what used to keep them there. What keeps them there, I think, is this opportunity that I'm going to get better in ways that I can't even imagine. This place offers me an opportunity to get better that I cannot find anywhere else. So these sorts of dual purpose pathways, these sorts of apprenticeship relationships, creating some intentionality about that learning, creating those reflective pauses, ends up being like core competencies for culture. Because if you just are in some transactional, getting it done job and nobody cares about your development, why wouldn't you leave? My short answer is I don't have a clue. This is all terra incognita. We don't know exactly how it's going to happen. What we think of as cohesion will be a different mode of cohesion or a different kind of cohesion. What we think of as chemistry or buy-in is going to be a different kind of buy-in, a different kind of chemistry, a different kind of care. There's one interesting company named Articulate that has been fully remote for 20 years. They're quite successful. What they've found is that they need to get together about once every 6 months in some location and bond and talk and connect. In the culture playbook, I talk a little bit about this importance of toggling, where we're moving from physical to virtual, physical to virtual, physical to kind of reignite those bounds, to be really intentional about the relationships. When you're in a physical work, you just sort of default setting to certain kinds of relationships. But the leadership bar in this new environment, in this hybrid environment, is going up because it requires a lot more intentionality around relationship building and cohesion building, around managing. There's a tip that I give in the new book about creative and productive work and how important it is to divide those work into two different buckets. It's much easier to do just simple, productive work, like the stuff you always do when you're remote. But if you want to invent new ideas, if you want to be creative at all, it pays wildly better to be together. There was one study of engineers solving a problem, and they talked about the problem 8 times more often when they were in person. Instead of just having to default to the physical office, we need to know, okay, on the 3 days that we're in the office, this is how we should spend our time. This is how we should fly through the forest together. This is a moment of great experimentation. Some of those experiments are around, how do we sort of create cohesion in this virtual world? And some cool practices are kind of emerging. Like one of them I would spotlight would be the pre-meeting warm-up. When there's a virtual meeting, doing some kind of warm-up to create a sort of a common experience, a common space, if you will, among the people in the virtual meeting. And I've seen it in action, to have everyone do some movement together, or everyone bite a slice of lemon together, as goofy as that sounds. And some of this stuff is goofy. Let's go back to vulnerability and trust. Some of this stuff does make you vulnerable. It does create that kind of shared connection. Culture is about the experiment. It's about the conversation. It's about the vulnerability. It's about creating that shared North Star that you're going after together. It'll evolve sort of like an ecosystem, a million different really cool solutions for a million different situations. It's not about big culture, it's about microculture. Every team has its microculture, and talking about that and co-creating the language you're going to use to describe, what are we doing? What are we about? Why do we work? How do we connect? What's the biggest problem we face? In the book, I call it a mantra map. And the guy who really embodies this is the restaurant owner, Danny Meyer. Some of you probably eaten his restaurants, right? Gramercy Tavern, Union Square Cafe. He's got about 20 of them. They're all wildly successful. Now, he started one restaurant and it was a huge success. And then he opened the second, and they both started to fail because he couldn't be in 2 places at once. Like, he was the culture. When he was around, you knew how to put the salt shaker out, and you knew how to talk to people and how to walk and how to move and how to treat people. But when he was gone, stuff started going off the rails. He did something really smart. He closed both restaurants and went off on a retreat. And that's when he started building his mantras. And the one he created for his true north was creating raves. It wasn't serving good food. It wasn't making money. It wasn't getting a 3-star Michelin review. It was creating raves. He ends up training around that, posting that wildly, talking about it all the time. And just like a magnetic field, it just orients everybody toward where we're going. Did I create any raves today? Where am I going? And how am I going to get there? What's going to stop me? That is really accessible and incredibly, incredibly powerful.